Bismillahir-Rahman-ir-Rahim. Tonight, we open a file that has been locked for 14 centuries, a file that exposes the greatest contradiction inside the Muslim world. The Quran presents one Muhammad, and Muslim history presents another. One is a human messenger, bound by revelation. The other is a cosmic being, shaped by poetry, politics, mysticism, and emotion. How did this transformation happen? Who changed the prophet's image and why? And most importantly, are we loving the prophet the way the Quran commands or the way culture demands? Welcome to the Missing Dots, where we connect the truths others fear to touch.
It is incredibly peaceful out here tonight.
Yeah, it really is.
Just hearing the sounds of the courtyard, settling down after the evening prayer. I mean, it really is the perfect time to sit down with you both and talk about something that sits at the very foundation of the faith.
Absolutely.
Because when you actually sit with the sources, the contradiction is almost heavy.
Right.
You read the pages of the Qur'an, and the portrait of the prophet is, well, it's so thoroughly grounded, it's sober, it's human, but then you walk out into the world.
Exactly. You look at the lived reality of how millions of people express their devotion today, and it feels like we are looking at an entirely different landscape.
It really does. I was thinking about this just the other day while going through the stack of historical texts and, theological debates we gathered for tonight.
Yeah.
And I want to be super clear to you listening with us right now. Our mission tonight isn't to issue religious rulings or, tell people how to practice their faith.
No, not at all.
We are simply looking at the texts. We want to trace the history and just try to understand the mechanics of how a human messenger became a cosmic entity.
Right.
But before we get into the history and the poetry and all of that, we really need a baseline.
We do.
Like, what does the original text, the Qur'an, actually say about him? Because my understanding is that the Qur'an defines him primarily through two very specific roles, right? A servant and a messenger.
That is exactly where we have to start. And the Arabic word for servant there is ab. Yeah. It is such an essential word to understand. Because in classical Arabic, and particularly in the way the Quran uses it, being an abd implies a state of absolute, total dependence.
Like you don't own anything.
Right. It is not like an employee who does a job and goes home. It means you possess nothing independently. You are entirely reliant on the Creator for your next breath, for your knowledge, for your protection.
Wow.
The Quran uses this word deliberately. It's there to establish a ceiling on human elevation.
So it's about establishing limits. I see that. What always strikes me, though, is when the Quran chooses to use that word.
What do you mean?
Well, think about the night journey.
The Isra.
Right, the Isra. From what I've read, this is arguably the most miraculous moment of his entire life.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, he is taken through the heavens, right? It's a moment of profound spiritual elevation that no other human being experiences. He's closer to the divine presence than anyone in history.
Yes.
And yet, if you look at Surah 17, verse 1, the verse that actually describes this event,
Yeah.
how does it refer to him?
It says, "Glory be to him who took his servant by night."
Exactly. His servant. It doesn't call him a cosmic light.
Yeah.
It doesn't call him a divine being. Even at the absolute peak of his spiritual journey, he is grounded in that human limitation. He is ibab.
That is a brilliant observation. And you find that classical commentators, scholars from centuries ago who wrote massive volumes explaining the Quran, people like Al-Razi or Ibn Kathir, they were very careful to point this exact detail out.
Did they?
Yeah. They noted that his servanthood is actually his highest honor.
Oh, interesting.
It's not a demotion. His greatness comes entirely from his submission to God, not from possessing any divine traits himself. It's a deliberate theological safeguard built right into the text.
A safeguard against what exactly? Like repeating the past?
Precisely. The Quran is intensely protective of monotheism.
Right.
It is preemptively blocking the kind of deification that happened to previous prophets.
You mean like Jesus?
Exactly. The obvious historical example being how Jesus was elevated in Christian theology from a human messenger to a divine figure, the literal Son of God.
Right.
So in Surah 18, verse 1 and 10, the command given to the prophet is explicit. He is told to say, "I am only a man like you, to whom has been revealed that your God is one God." The word used there is bashar.
Bashar, meaning flesh and blood.
Yes, flesh and blood.
I often think of it like an ambassador.
Okay, how so?
Well, if a king sends an ambassador to a distant province, that ambassador speaks with the full weight and authority of the crown, right?
Right.
You have to obey the ambassador because to disrespect him is to disrespect the king who sent him. But the ambassador is not the king.
Right, of course not.
He doesn't own the treasury. He doesn't make the laws himself. He just delivers the message. So why do you think human beings struggle so much to respect the ambassador without eventually, trying to put the crown on his head?
That is a wonderful analogy.
Yeah.
And it really cuts right to the heart of human psychology.
How so?
Because human nature craves something tangible to worship.
Right.
Or in this context, the creator is distant, unseen, perhaps intimidating. But the ambassador is right there in front of you.
You can see him.
Exactly. You can see his kindness. You can hear his wisdom. He is the one directly helping you navigate your life.
Yeah.
So it's a very natural human impulse to start directing your awe and your ultimate reliance toward the visible source of your guidance.
Rather than the invisible source of his authority.
Exactly.
Which makes sense of why the Qur'an shows us his vulnerability so clearly. It's like it's trying to prevent us from putting the crown on his head.
Yes.
I was reading through some of the stories, and there are these moments of sheer human struggle. He faces anxiety. He seeks refuge from his worries. He doesn't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
That's right.
I'm thinking specifically of that incident with the blind man. Can you walk us through what happened there?
Ah, yeah. You're referring to the events of Surah Abasa. He frowned.
Yeah, that's the one.
This is one of the most remarkable moments of transparency in the text. You have to imagine the intense political pressure the prophet was under in Mecca at the time.
It was intense.
Very. His followers were a small, vulnerable minority facing severe persecution. And one day, he is deep in conversation with the wealthy, influential, tribal elites of the city.
Right.
He is pouring all his energy into convincing them of the message, knowing that if just one of these leaders accepts it, it could secure the safety of all the Muslims.
So the political calculus is huge here.
Enormous. And right in the middle of this high-stakes negotiation, a blind man named Ibn Maktoum approaches him.
Okay.
He's already a believer, and he keeps interrupting, asking the prophet to teach him. And the prophet, feeling the overwhelming strategic pressure of the moment, frowns and turns away from the blind man to focus on the elites.
And the Qur'an actually corrects him for this, right?
Yes. Gently but firmly, the divine revelation corrects his course. It reminds him that the sincere seeker, even a poor blind man, is more worthy of his time than the arrogant elite who think they don't need guidance.
That is such a powerful story because it shows that his moral perfection, his status is the excellent example, it's a human achievement guided by God.
Exactly.
It's not some robotic inevitability. He makes a human calculation based on the intense stress he is under, and revelation steps in.
Yeah.
So, okay, we have this grounded flesh and blood portrait, a man of clay chosen to deliver a message.
Right.
But here's where I get confused. If the text is so incredibly explicit, how on earth did an entire civilization convince itself otherwise?
Right.
Because we fast forward through history and we see this profound shift. The image changes from a human servant to a cosmic entity. How did a religion so obsessed with monotheism let love turn into cosmology?
It's a massive question.
Yeah.
And the answer is that it did not happen overnight.
Okay.
It was a gradual process driven by history, by politics, by the spread of an empire, and ultimately by trauma. Yes. If we look at the early generations, the companions who actually lived with them, their relationship was based on immediate physical reality. But as the prophet passed away and decades turned into centuries, the Muslim world expanded massively.
So what happened first? I know we have the Umayyad and Abbasid eras. These were the early massive empires, right?
Yes. You had empires stretching from Spain all the way to India, and the political leaders of these empires, the caliphs, began to lean heavily on prophetic lineage for legitimacy.
Oh, I see.
If you were biologically related to the prophet, it gave you massive political capital. It was a way to tell the masses, you have to obey me because I share the blood of the messenger.
So it was politics?
Yes. The focus started to shift slightly. He became a symbol of political authority and royal legacy.
Okay, I can see how politicians would use his legacy, but that doesn't explain the theology. That doesn't explain how he became a being of light who sustains the universe. Where does the metaphysical shift happen?
For that, you really have to look at the medieval period. This is what historians often call the Sufi turn.
Okay.
And to understand it, you have to understand the trauma the Muslim world went through.
You mean the Mongols?
Exactly. When the Mongols invaded in the 13th century, they completely devastated the Islamic Empire. They burned Baghdad to the ground.
It was brutal.
Beyond brutal. They threw the books from the grand libraries into the Tigris River until the water ran black with ink. For centuries, Muslims had believed that God's favor was manifested in their physical, earthly success.
Right, because they were winning.
Yes. And suddenly, the physical empire collapsed. It was an existential crisis. People literally thought the world was ending.
So if the physical kingdom on Earth is destroyed, I guess you have to look somewhere else for security.
Precisely. The external world was terrifying, so people turned inward. They thought spiritual security, they needed an invincible, untouchable kingdom. And thinkers in this era, most famously a mystic and philosopher named Ibn Arabi, began to introduce incredibly complex philosophical concepts to make sense of the universe.
Ibn Arabi, he's the one who came up with the idea of the perfect human, right? Al-Insan al-Kamil.
Yes.
Can you explain what that actually means in plain English?
I will try.
Yeah.
Ibn Arabi essentially posited that the universe was created so that God could be known, and the ultimate perfect mirror reflecting God's attributes to the universe is the Prophet Muhammad.
Okay.
He called this the Mohammedan reality. It moved the prophet from being a historical figure who walked in the markets of Mecca and delivered a book to being the very reason the universe was created in the first place.
SubhanAllah.
The spiritual archetype of all creation.
But wait, hold on. Let me push back on this a little bit.
Sure.
Because when we talk about this shift, it's very easy to frame it as some, I don't know, malicious corruption of the religion.
Right.
But if you look at the sources, isn't it entirely natural for different cultures to express love in their own languages? I mean, think about it. Islam spreads into Persia, into the Byzantine world, into South Asia. It encounters people who have entirely different vocabularies for greatness.
Yes.
If a Persian poet uses the language of royal divine glory, what was it, Farizadi?
No.
Because that is how Persians historically describe ultimate greatness.
Right.
Or if a South Asian Muslim expresses devotion using the intense emotional language of Hindu bhakti, this overwhelming devotional love, are they really trying to change the religion? Or are they just translating their love for the prophet into a cultural vocabulary they actually understand?
That is the exact tension we are looking at tonight. You are
Yeah.
absolutely right, that it was not a malicious corruption. It was driven by a deep, genuine, emotional need.
Yeah.
People wanted a loving, accessible, cosmic figure to relate to, especially when their physical world was falling apart. When you look at the Christian traditions of saint veneration and sacred relics that existed in the lands Muslims conquered, or those Persian ideas of divine kingship you mentioned,
Yeah.
you see these cultural rivers flowing into the ocean of Islamic practice. They wanted to elevate him using the absolute highest vocabulary their cultures possessed.
And poetry must have been the vehicle for that. I mean, poetry was essentially the mass media of the medieval world.
It really was. And the most famous example is al-Busiri.
Oh, I've heard of him.
He was a poet in the 13th century who wrote a masterpiece of Arabic literature called the Burda.
The poem of the mantle.
Yes, it is filled with intense love and incredible hyperbole. It praises the prophet in ways that soar far beyond basic human descriptions. And it became wildly popular. People memorized it, sang it, wrote it on the walls of mosques.
Okay, I love poetry, but I also know the danger of it.
What's the danger?
Well, when a poet looks at someone they love and says, "You are the light of the universe, you are my entire world," everyone knows it is a metaphor.
Right.
It's an expression of intense feeling. But it seems to me the problem arises when later generations stop reading poetry as poetry. A few centuries go by, and a theologian reads that poem and says, the text says he is the light of the universe. Therefore, he is literally made of primordial light.
Exactly.
They start reading poetic metaphors as literal theological facts. Am I off base there?
Not at all. That is precisely the mechanism of how things changed. What started as spontaneous, poetic emotion gradually hardened into theology and ritual.
Wow.
Take the Ottoman Empire, for example. Over centuries, they eventually institutionalized many of these emotional practices.
Like what?
Well, celebrating the prophet's birthday, the Mawlid, became a massive state-sponsored event. Standing up out of respect during the recitation of his birth story, the Qiyam became a formalized ritual.
Right.
These practices came to define what it meant to be a good Muslim in popular culture. The metaphor became the literal truth.
And that brings us to the actual theological clash, because eventually this massive cultural evolution collides with the strict scholars of the text.
Yes, it does.
The ones holding on to the Quranic baseline we talked about at the start. And from the texts we are reviewing, it seems they started fighting bitterly over two massive questions. First, what is the prophet made of? And second, what did he know?
Yes. The debates over Nur and Gaib, light and the unseen.
Right.
This is where the beautiful emotional history hits the very hard, unyielding wall of creed.
So to understand this, I think we need to set the stage for you listening. A lot of the texts we have tonight regarding this specific debate come from South Asia in the 19th and 20th centuries.
That's right.
Can you explain who the main voices are here? Because I see terms like Barelvi and Deobandi popping up everywhere in these texts. For someone who has no idea what those are, who are we talking about?
Is essential context. In 19th century colonial India, Muslims had lost their political power to the British.
Right.
In response to that, different scholarly movements emerged to protect the faith. Two of the most prominent were the Deobandi movement and the Barelvi movement.
Okay, so what did the Deobandis believe?
The Deobandis were highly focused on scripture, strict adherence to Islamic law, and stripping away what they saw as cultural innovations. They wanted to return to a very sober orthodox practice.
And the Barelvis?
The Barelvis, founded by a brilliant scholar named Ahmad Rida Khan, were deeply rooted in the Sufi traditions and the popular devotional love for the Prophet.
I see.
They saw the Deobandi strictness as disrespectful to the Prophet's honor.
Okay, that makes sense. So we have a strict, scripture-focused movement and a deeply devotional, mystical movement. Let's look at the first thing they clashed over. What he was made of.
The concept of Nur Muhammadi, primordial light.
Right, because remember, the Qur'an says he is Bashar, a man of clay.
Exactly.
But over time, in the Barelvi and certain Sufi traditions, the belief solidified that he was actually the very first creation of God.
Yes.
Not a man of clay, but a primordial lightener created before the universe, before the angels, before time itself.
And I imagine, you know how the Deobandis and the more orthodox scholars like the Salafi movement in the Arab world reacted to this?
Oh, they completely reject it.
Entirely. They maintain that he is physically human, bound by biology, born of parents just like anyone else.
Right.
They look at the idea of him being made of literal light as an interpretive expansion that risks altering his fundamental nature. They argue that taking poetry about light literally contradicts the explicit verses of the Qur'an.
But the debate over what he knew seems even more intense than what he was made of.
Ilm al-Ghaib, knowledge of the unseen.
Yeah. Earlier, we talked about Surah 7, verse 188. The Qur'an commands the prophet to say, "If I knew the unseen, I would have acquired much wealth and no harm would have touched me."
It is incredibly direct.
It really is. Yet, the sources show the Barelvi tradition asserting that he actually has comprehensive knowledge of the universe. How do they reconcile that?
They do it through a very specific theological distinction.
Which is?
They differentiate between absolute independent unseen knowledge, which belongs only to God, and granted unseen knowledge.
Granted, meaning it was given to him.
Exactly. The Barelvi schools argue that God chose to give this comprehensive knowledge to the prophet. Because it is a gift, a delegated power, they argue it does not challenge God's ultimate authority. He knows everything because God showed him everything.
Okay, let me try an analogy here to see if I understand the two sides.
Let's hear it.
It sounds like the difference between someone giving you a map of a city versus you claiming to be the satellite that sees the whole world in real time.
Oh, that's good.
Right. The mainstream scholars, the Deobandis, they say God gave him the map for specific routes. God gave him specific revelations about the future or the unseen when it was necessary for his mission.
Right.
But the devotional traditions are saying he is the satellite, he sees everything. But here's my question. Doesn't giving him comprehensive knowledge, even if you say it is a delegated gift, literally contradict the verse where he says he doesn't have it?
That is the big question.
I mean, if I say, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but secretly God gave me a satellite feed of tomorrow, aren't I contradicting the text?
That is the exact argument of the Salafi and Deobandi schools. They see these claims as crossing a very dangerous line into shirk.
Which means associating partners with God.
Yes, because omniscience, knowing everything everywhere, is a divine attribute. Even if you say God delegated it, you are still attributing a divine quality to a created human being.
Right.
For the strict scholars, the line between creator and created must remain absolute.
And reading through these accounts, the stakes here are terrifyingly high.
They are.
This isn't just an academic debate happening in a quiet library over tea. People's lives and their standing in the faith are on the line over these definitions. Look at what happened with the fatwa of apostasy in India.
You were talking about the incident with Ashraf Ali Thanawi.
Yes, tell that story, because it
That's-
perfectly illustrates what happens when these two worlds collide.
It really does. So Ashraf Ali Thanawi was a highly prominent Deobandi scholar in the early 20th century.
Yeah.
He wrote a book trying to clarify these exact limits we were talking about. He argued that calling the prophet the knower of the unseen without strict qualification was problematic.
Makes sense.
He used logic, stating that if you say the prophet has partial knowledge of the unseen, well, animals and madmen also have partial knowledge of things we don't see. So the title isn't exclusive.
Oh, wow. And the response to that logic was explosive.
Beyond explosive. The leader of the Barelvi movement, Ahmad Rida Khan, was horrified by the comparison. He believed Thanawi had gravely disrespected the prophet.
So what did he do?
In response, he issued a massive fatwa declaring Thanawi and several other Deobandi scholars to be apostates, disbelievers.
Just for that?
Yes, he ruled that they had insulted the prophet and therefore they were outside the fold of Islam. Just for trying to define a limit based on a Quranic verse. It shows how deeply emotional and volatile this theology has become.
It really reveals a profound psychological reality about human devotion.
It does.
I mean, for many devotees, any attempt to define limits on the prophet feels like a personal insult. Think about anyone you love deeply. If you love someone, you want to attribute the highest possible qualities to them.
Right.
So when a scholar steps in with a textbook and says, actually, the text says he didn't know that, it doesn't feel like a defense of monotheism. It feels like an attack on their love.
That is exactly how it is perceived. It is seen as a lack of love, a dryness of the heart.
And this theology doesn't just stay in books or fatwas. It dictates how people actually live, how they act, and where they go when they are in trouble.
Yes.
Which brings us to the physical reality of all this, the shrines, the graves, and asking for help. Because if someone truly believes the prophet is made of cosmic light and that he has knowledge of the unseen, that directly changes what they do when they are facing a crisis.
It changes everything.
Yeah.
We're moving from abstract theology to physical action here. It stems from a belief known as Hadir Nazir.
Hadir Nazir, what does that mean?
It's the idea that the prophet is spiritually omnipresent, witnessing the actions of the community everywhere in the world.
Wow.
If you believe he is watching and listening right now, it changes how you pray and who you ask for help.
Which brings up the practice of tawassul, intercession. From the sources, this seems to be a huge spectrum. Can you break down what tawassul actually is?
Sure. Tawassul is a practice of drawing near to God by using a means. In this context, it usually means asking God for something through the status or honor of the prophet.
Can you give an example?
Yeah, for example, saying, "Oh God, I ask you by the rank of your prophet to heal my mother."
And what do the historical scholars say about that?
It is a complex area. Classical scholars like Al-Ghazali, who was a massive intellectual figure in the 11th century, allowed it.
He did.
Yes. He saw it as a valid, humble way to approach God. On the other hand, you have a scholar like Ibn Taymiyyah in the 14th century who was much stricter. He argued you could ask the living prophet to pray for you, but after his death, that door is closed. Modern Deobandis fall somewhere in the middle, allowing it cautiously but constantly warning the public against excess.
Okay, so tawassul is just asking God, but using the prophet's name as a boost. That seems like one thing.
Right.
But reading the critics, the real danger, the absolute red line for many scholars, is something called istighatha, seeking aid directly.
Yes. Istighatha is crying out directly to the prophet or to a deceased saint for supernatural help.
So not asking God at all.
Exactly. Saying, "Oh, Muhammad, heal my sick child," or, "Oh, saint, grant me a job."
And the theological alarm bells just go entirely deafening at this point.
Absolutely. The Salafi school and many Orthodox scholars view istighatha as major shirk. They argue that calling upon a human being who has passed away for supernatural help is a direct act of worship.
And in Islam, worship belongs exclusively to God.
Exactly. Mainstream traditionalists who might allow tawassul see istighatha as a very dangerous slippery slope.
But the Barelvis disagree.
Yes. If you look at the Barelvi and Sufi texts, their devotees see it as a completely legitimate appeal. They believe God appointed the prophet and the saints as cosmic agents. To them, asking the prophet for help is just asking God's appointed representative.
I want to pause here and step away from the theology books for a second.
Okay.
Because there is a very human element to this that I think gets lost in the fatwas.
There is.
Imagine a mother. Her child is terribly sick. The doctors have given up. She is exhausted. And spiritually, she feels broken. She feels sinful, dirty, and entirely distant from God.
Right.
She feels like God is a mighty king who would never listen to someone as flawed as her. So she travels to a shrine. She stands at the grave of a saint or at the prophet's mosque with tears streaming down her face, and she calls out to them directly.
Because she is desperate.
Exactly. She needs someone closer to God, someone pure, to hear her pain. When you look at the strict scholars, how do they handle that raw human pain. Is it fair to just coldly label her actions as shirk and condemn her without understanding the absolute desperation that drove her there?
It is the most difficult pastoral question a scholar can face. The strict theological answer is unyielding. Desperation does not justify directing worship to creation.
Right.
The texts are clear that God is closer to us than our jugular vein, and that he answers the desperate directly.
But humanely.
Humanely. Scholars who work with the public recognize that her intention is born of agonizing pain, not a conscious desire to rebel against monotheism. Her heart is just searching for mercy.
So where's the tragedy in that for the Orthodox scholar?
The tragedy is that she has been taught by centuries of cultural accretion that God is too distant to hear her directly. She's been conditioned to believe she needs a middleman.
And that belief completely alters the physical landscape of the Muslim world. You get the massive phenomenon of shrine culture.
You do.
The tombs of Sufi saints and the Prophet's own resting place in Medina become these massive centers of pilgrimage. People bring their grief, their hopes, their worldly problems to these graves.
And if you look at the history, you see a massive contrast here between the early days and now.
Really? How so?
If you read the early scholars on how to visit a grave, the prescribed manner is quiet, solemn respect. You stand there, you reflect on your own mortality, you offer a greeting of peace to the deceased, make a prayer to God for them, and you leave.
But if you travel today to some shrines in South Asia or Turkey or North Africa, it is not quiet reflection.
Not at all. It is a completely different atmosphere. There's loud music, there's Qawwali devotional singing, there are elaborate rituals, there is weeping and wailing at the silver gates and closing the tombs.
Yeah.
It's a highly charged communal event.
Yeah.
The sober reflection of the early generations has been replaced by a dynamic, almost overwhelming sensory experience of devotion.
Which naturally forces us to ask, if the modern practice is so loud and the Quranic text is so sober, how did the people who actually lived with him treat him?
Right.
Because to resolve this tension, we have to look at the people who loved the Prophet the most, the companions, the Sahaba. They offer the clearest practical example. What was their devotion like?
The companions had a profound sacrificial love for him. The historical accounts are filled with instances where they would gladly defend him with their own lives. They loved him more than their own parents. But the key difference is that they did not hold metaphysical or cosmic theories about his nature.
Because they knew him.
Exactly. They related to him as a human leader, a close friend, a brilliant teacher, and above all, a messenger.
Because they saw his humanity every single day. They saw him bleed in battle. They saw him tie a stone to his stomach because he was starving. That grounded their theology, didn't it?
It did. And the defining moment of that grounded theology is Umar ibn al-Khattab's reaction to the Prophet's death.
Set the scene for us. What happened on that day in Medina?
It was a day of absolute shock. The Prophet had been ill, but when the news finally broke that he had passed away, the community was paralyzed.
We can't even imagine.
Umar, who was known for his immense strength and fierce love for the Prophet, completely lost his bearings. He drew his sword in the middle of the mosque and threatened to kill anyone who said the Prophet was dead.
Wait, he drew his sword?
Yes. He claimed the Prophet had just gone to meet God, like Moses did, and would return. He simply could not process the loss of this man, who was their direct lifeline to heaven.
So the emotional trauma was blinding him.
Yes. But then Abu Bakr, the closest friend of the Prophet, steps in.
What does he do?
He walks past Umar, goes into the room where the Prophet's body is, kisses his forehead, and confirms he is dead. Abu Bakr then walks out to the panicked crowd, silences Umar, and recites a verse from the Qur'an.
Which verse?
Then he declares, "Whoever worships Muhammad, let him know that Muhammad is dead. Whoever worships Allah, Allah is alive and does not die."
Subhanallah, that is incredible.
It was the ultimate reality check. It snapped Umar and the entire community back to the Quranic baseline immediately. The human being dies. The creator remains.
And you see that boundary maintained even while he was alive, too.
How so?
Well, they loved him, but they maintained legal and ethical boundaries with him. I read an account where the Prophet wanted to unilaterally forgive a debt on behalf of someone, and Abu Bakr actually refused to let him do it without following the proper legal procedure.
Yes.
They obeyed him absolutely in matters of divine revelation, but they knew he was functioning within a system of human justice, not floating above it.
Exactly. And we also have the incredible intimate accounts from his wife, Aisha.
Oh, she provides so much detail.
She really does. She is the one who tells us about his humanity behind closed doors. When people asked her what he did at home, she didn't say he floated on light.
Right.
She said he would mend his own shoes, patch his own garments, and help with domestic chores. She talks about his fears, his human moments. She gives us a portrait of a man who is deeply connected to the mundane, everyday realities of life.
So the companions achieved this perfect balance. They loved him deeply, they obeyed him,
That was
but
it.
they never blurred the line between the creator and the created. They didn't need him to be a cosmic light to follow his example. Sitting here thinking about it, tracing this from the Qur'an, through the empires, through the poetry, to the shrines today,
Yeah.
I can't help but feel that over the centuries, we have traded imitation for veneration.
That is a very sharp observation.
Think about the actual life of the prophet. It is so incredibly hard to forgive your bitter enemies the way he did when they stoned him at Tithe.
It is.
It is so hard to stand up in the middle of the night and pray until your feet physically crack. It is hard to be perfectly just when you have political power.
Very hard.
But it is very, very easy to stand up in a crowd, sway to music, and sing a beautiful poem about him being made of primordial light.
Yeah.
Did we elevate him to the cosmos so we wouldn't have to do the hard work of emulating him on Earth?
Veneration is passive. It asks almost nothing of your daily character. Imitation is active, and it demands constant, exhausting moral struggle. By turning him into a supernatural entity, we inadvertently create a massive distance between his life and ours. It allows a believer to say, well, of course he was perfect and forgave his enemies. He was made of divine light. I am just a normal human. I can't be expected to act like that.
Wow. It relieves the burden.
It relieves the believer of the heavy burden of trying to match his ethical example.
And the incredible thing is he actually warned us about this exact human tendency. There is a specific hadith where he tries to build a wall against this, right?
Yes, he explicitly told his followers, do not exaggerate concerning me as the Christians exaggerated concerning the Son of Mary. I am only a servant, so say, the servant of Allah and his messenger.
He knew.
He saw the human tendency toward hyperbole. He knew how love could warp into deification. He wanted his legacy to be the message he delivered, not a cult of personality built around his metaphysical essence.
So we arrive back where we started, the contradiction. We have looked at the history, the trauma of the Mongols, the beautiful poetry of the Burda, the intense theology of the Deobandis and Barelvis, and the raw human emotion of the shrines. It is a gap built out of love, but a love that sometimes loses its compass.
It is a profound historical reality. And I think the challenge for a thoughtful person today is to look at their own practices and ask a very quiet, sincere question.
Which did.
Is my devotion drawing me closer to the Creator he pointed to, or is it stopping at the messenger himself?
That really is the ultimate question, isn't it? Because if you think about it, if the prophet returned today, if he walked into one of the massive music-filled celebrations held in his honor, or if he stood quietly in a courtyard and heard the poems attributing control of the universe to his hands, would he recognize the religion he spent 23 years bleeding and sacrificing to establish? Or would he gently, perhaps with tears in his eyes, remind us once again that he's only a man to whom revelation was sent? May Allah grant us success. Come on, let's go. Don't forget to follow this channel, The Missing Dots. Thank you.